LARP events and overnight in nature, which starts this experience with me huddled in my goblin gear with a backpack on filled with food, water, and a tent. And off into the woods I went. Here I find a good place with no stones and a good distance from the lake. After some time, I set up the tent and started practicing as a goblin, and time is going fast. Before I knew it, it was dark, so I got ready to go to sleep. My nose, ears, and armor are taken off, but I have to accept myself having the green paint overnight. I woke up startled by the sound of something very big moving between the trees, and something that sounded like an elephant. But it's very obvious there are no elephants here. I became nervous about what it is, and now it sounds like there are several of them all around my tent. But then it got completely quiet, and I was relieved, and eventually fell asleep again. I'm not so easily intimidated. The next morning I wake up and get out of the tent when I see there are 5 big stones about 6 to 7 meters high around the tent in a circle. I have heard about trolls before, and that they turn into stones in daylight, so I decided to pack up and go home to talk about what had happened. I have since been back to look, but the stones were now in a completely different place. This is just one experience out of many. I have also met a beautiful naked woman with purple eyes singing and living in the lake, a long-distance witch ritual, and more experiences with ghosts than I can count. Thanks for listening to my story. Nightly Encounters with Bigfoot, from Mutant APK. So, I have had 4 encounters so far with Bigfoot. Mind you, I never saw it. It was more like I heard them. I say them because it sounds like there's more than one where I live. A couple of years ago, when I was taking my dogs out before coming to bed at 11 at night, I was about to bring them inside when I heard a bunch of howls and wood knocks. At first, I thought it was the coyotes doing the howls, but these sounded deeper. After I brought the dogs in, I decided to look up what that sound was. Honestly, I got chills when I found those howls matched those of a California Bigfoot. My next encounter was when my mom couldn't sleep, as she kept hearing a howling noise outside. So I decided to go see what it was. Boy, I wish I hadn't, as when I got out there, I heard the howling again like before. But this one sounded like it was 2 of them, one in each direction. I had to get inside, as basically, call it a cliché horror troupe, but I actually felt the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. My 3rd encounter. I was once again taking the dogs out for their nightly walk, and once again, as I was about to bring them back inside, up on the hill that is nearby, I heard 3 distinct wood knocks. My most recent encounter was again when I was taking the dogs out for their nightly walk. When my newest puppy reared up on her hind legs as if she saw something, I tried to shine my flashlight to where she was looking, but I didn't see anything. She started growling at something, and I was telling her to come on as I'm pulling on the leash. Suddenly, I felt this whoosh of air beside me, and I noticed something landed right beside me with a low thud. I shined the flashlight and saw a rock about the size of my fist landed right beside me. So something must have thrown it at me. I haven't had any more aggressive encounters so far, but I'm not going to provoke it into being aggressive. Rougarou Encounter Story, from Anonymous. I grew up in a small house on the outskirts of Wilmot, Arkansas, surrounded by dense woods and winding bayous. It was the kind of place where the quiet could either soothe your soul or put you on edge, depending on your mood. The nights were especially dark out there, the kind of dark where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. It was the only home I'd ever known, and I never thought twice about living so close to the wilderness. That changed one cold, rainy night when I came face to face with something I still struggled to explain. It was late, close to midnight, and I was driving home from a friend's house. The gravel road leading to my house cut through an open field before disappearing into the woods. The rain had been falling steadily all evening, turning the road into a slick mess of mud and puddles. My truck's headlights pierced through the gloom, illuminating the narrow path ahead. I'd driven that road countless times, and was used to spotting deer or raccoons darting across the way. So when I saw movement in the distance, I slowed down, expecting the usual. What stepped into the beam of my headlights was anything but usual. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, the details didn't add up. The creature was massive, easily 8 feet tall, and stood upright like a man. Its body was covered in long, wet fur that clung to its frame, dark and matted from the rain. A long, bushy tail swung behind it, and its head was what froze me in place. It had the features of a wolf, a long snout, pointed ears, and glowing red eyes that seemed to burn in the darkness. It paused in the middle of the road, turning its head to look directly at me. For a moment, we locked eyes, and I felt an overwhelming wave of dread. Those eyes weren't just animalistic. They held something more, an intelligence that made my stomach churn. The creature stood there for what felt like an eternity before turning and disappearing into the woods with a fluid, almost predatory grace. I sat frozen in my truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced to make sense of what I'd just seen. When I finally managed to pull myself together, I drove the rest of the way home, constantly checking my mirrors as if I expected the creature to follow me. The rain continued to pour as I pulled into my driveway, and I sprinted into the house, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind against the windows, made me jump. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, maybe a bear or some other animal distorted by the rain and my own imagination. But deep down, I knew better. A few nights later, I was in my living room, reading by the soft glow of a lamp. The rain had returned, tapping lightly against the windows. The house was quiet, except for the occasional groan of the old wood floors. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps outside. At first, I thought it might be a stray dog, or maybe a deer wandering too close. But these steps were deliberate, methodical. They crunched through the wet leaves, circling the house. I turned off the lamp and moved to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. Peeking through the curtain, I scanned the yard, but the rain and darkness made it hard to see much. Then, just at the edge of the tree line, I saw them. 2 glowing red eyes, staring directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. The eyes didn't blink or move. They just hovered there, burning like coals in the night. I stumbled back from the window, grabbing the rifle I kept by the door. When I looked again, the eyes were gone, but I wasn't reassured. I checked every window, but there was no sign of the creature. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That sense of unease lingered for the rest of the night, and even in the safety of my locked house, I couldn't relax. The next morning, I went outside to look for signs of what had been there. The rain had washed away any tracks, but I found broken branches near the tree line and a strange smell in the air, like wet fur and decay. It was faint, but distinct, and it made my stomach turn. Whatever had been out there wasn't gone. It was waiting. I decided to stay away from the woods for a while, but the creature didn't seem to care about boundaries. One night I stepped outside to bring in some firewood. The air was cold and damp, and a thick fog had settled over the bayou. As I approached the woodpile, I felt that familiar sense of dread, like I was being watched. I turned toward the trees and froze. There it was again, standing just beyond the edge of the yard. The creature's red eyes burned through the fog, locked onto me with an intensity that made my knees weak. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was suffocating. I backed toward the house, keeping my eyes on it the entire time. When I reached the door, I bolted inside, slamming it shut and locking it. Grabbing my rifle, I stepped onto the porch, determined to confront whatever this thing was. But it was gone. The only evidence of its presence was the faint rustle of leaves as the fog swallowed the woods. I started asking around, trying to find anyone who might know what I'd seen. Most people dismissed it as a bear or some other animal, but one older neighbor, Mr. Thomas, listened intently. When I described the creature, his face grew serious. "Some folks around here call it the Rougarou," he said. "It's a legend, but legends don't come from nowhere. They say it's part man, part beast, cursed to roam the swamps and bayous. You'd best be careful, boy. That thing, it ain't something you want to mess with." Hearing someone else acknowledge the possibility of what I'd seen was both comforting and terrifying. It meant I wasn't imagining things, but it also meant the creature was real. I decided to set up a trail camera near the tree line, hoping to catch proof of its existence. For weeks, the camera captured nothing unusual. Then, one morning, I checked the footage and saw it. The creature was partially obscured by the trees, but its red eyes were unmistakable. It stood on two legs, its massive frame hunched forward as it stared directly into the camera. The footage was blurry, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I showed it to Mr. Thomas, who just shook his head. "You've got trouble on your hands," he said. "That thing doesn't look like it's passing through. It's watching you." After that, I stopped going outside after dark. I installed motion sensor lights around the house and double-checked the locks on all my doors and windows. The sightings became less frequent, but the sense of unease never went away. Even during the day, I'd catch myself glancing toward the woods, half expecting to see those burning red eyes staring back at me. It's been years since those encounters, but they've stayed with me. I still live in the same house, but I've learned to keep my distance from the woods. Whatever that creature was, it's still out there, and I have no desire to cross paths with it again. Some things are better left undisturbed, hidden in the shadows where they belong. The State Park Beast, from The Camping Guy, 24. This part is my friend's story, so I'm going to be telling it from his perspective. On a normal day after waking up, he got ready to take his weekly hike in the woods. Since it was Saturday, it was the perfect time to go again. So he packed up his gear and started driving. By the time he got to the state park, he was starving because he forgot to eat before he left, and he didn't want to eat all his food for the hike. Luckily for him, there was a general store near that served ice cream. So he scurried over to the store, got some ice cream, and went on his way. He started following the main trail for about an hour before he had to use the restroom. There weren't really that many people on the trail, so he figured he could head off the trail and go pee in the bushes. So that's what he did. He went off the trail, unzipped his pants, and he heard something. It was like a bear, but if a bear was standing on 2 feet walking. He heard this and got scared because he thought it was a bear, but he looked up as he was zipping up his pants, and there was what looked like a giant ape. He's talking arms the width of a normal-sized tree, and legs were almost the same size but maybe a little bigger. It was about 11 feet tall. It was just standing there about 60 yards away. He thought it was a statue of Bigfoot or something like that, but then it started moving, and he felt like he should get out of there. He found the path, followed it back to the visitor center, and drove back home, not knowing what to think of what he saw. This part is both me and my friend's story. My friend told me about what he saw, and I immediately believed him, because he doesn't joke around about that kind of stuff. He asked me if I would come with him to go back to the state park to see if we can see the thing he saw, and he seemed pretty excited. So I said, why not? The next day, we drove to the visitor center and walked to the trails. He led me down the same path he was on that day, and we went to the exact spot he saw it. We saw nothing. We decided to camp out and come back in the morning. So we started pitching our tents and setting up camp after paying the fee. But my friend woke me up in the middle of the night, shaking me awake. As I woke up, I thought we were having an earthquake, because the ground was shaking. But we peeked outside, and right above our tent, there was the creature shaking the tree we were under. It must have been shaking the roots, because the ground was shaking. It must have hurt us, though, because it ran off, and we packed up and left that night because we were terrified. Guy trying to lure kids into the woods. From Anonymous. It was sometime in late September of 2017. I was invited over to my friend Aiden's house for the day, along with my friends Harry and Anthony. However, I was the only one who was available that day. At the time, me and Aiden, along with my other two friends, wanted to make a short horror film, which took place at an abandoned concrete building in the middle of the woods. Aiden says it's a farmhouse, while others say it was an insane asylum. I still don't know for sure what it is, but we decided to walk down there to set up some props there for when we film. The walk there was about 20 minutes. Right before you make it to the entrance, you must walk down an asphalt path through the middle of the woods, and then to your left would be the entrance to the abandoned place. So we made it to the building, which was about 4 stories tall and had 4 rooms. The first room was a large room with plenty of open space. The other rooms were smaller and were connected to each other, but separated from the first room. To get to the 4th room without walking around the building, you had to go through rooms 2 and 3 first. We made it to the building, and we decided to go to the last room to check for any props we could use. We searched around for a few minutes, but didn't find anything that was useful. We decided to head back to the first room and check there instead. However, when I turned my back and began walking, I heard a huge crunch of leaves coming from behind me. My heart stopped, and I quickly turned my head around and saw something swish behind a wall that I was just at. I immediately told Aiden, but he didn't believe me and told me to hurry up. I continued walking while looking behind me every few seconds. Doing so, I fell behind, and Aiden was almost back at the first room already. I ran to catch up with him, just when I got the doorway of the first room, and Aiden was only about 10 feet in front of me. An old man came out from behind a wall that was next to Aiden and stood in front of him. The old man shouted, "Oh, hello there!" and tried to grab Aiden. We immediately turned around and began running towards the back rooms, but doing so, Aiden tripped, though I continued running without even noticing. Aiden quickly got back on his feet and followed me. Instead of going to the back rooms, I took a sharp turn and cut through some plants and trees and ended up on another path that was next to the building that was intended for dirt bikes. Aiden caught up with me, and we began panicking, not sure what we should do. We could either run down the bike path over towards the entrance, but in the direction of the old man, or run the other way, but towards the other person that swished behind that wall, and not even knowing whether there was an exit that way. I tried to convince Aiden to go back towards the entrance, but he ran the other way, not wanting to be alone in this situation. I followed. The path cut through a tall grass field, which we ran through as fast as possible, with me looking behind myself frequently. The path ended right in front of another path we took to get to the building. So we cut through the tall grass and made it onto the path and began walking back to Aiden's house. We made it back to his neighborhood and sat down on a curb, drinking our bottles of water and discussing what happened, but eventually went back to his house after finishing our water. After that encounter, according to one of Aiden's friends, the next day they were riding their bike down the same asphalt path and past the entrance. Then they spotted the old man by the entrance, waving his hand to signal them to come in. As expected, they left as soon as possible. If that's the case, I'm pretty certain this was a PED trying to lure kids in. I seriously hope nobody fell for his trap. Laughing in the park, from a non-girl. A couple of summers ago, I was in a relationship with a shady dude. He used to get into trouble a lot, mostly because he would finesse people by selling them what was essentially a little bit of grass on top of tissue paper. In pill bottles they couldn't see through, and getting away with their money before they figured out. They got a lot less than what they paid for. But one night, he was planning on doing this to a really scary-looking dude, and I was already nervous that something was going to go down. But he left on his bike to meet the guy near the park, and told me he would be back in maybe 15 minutes at most. Well, a little less than an hour had passed. No texts from him at all. Which wasn't a big surprise because he didn't have service, and his phone was already messed up to begin with. But I was terrified something bad happened. So I decided to go check the park out. I wore all black, and I brought a kitchen knife and flashlight with me. I was a huge baby when it came to the dark, but I needed to make sure my boyfriend was okay. I was thinking maybe the guy he was going to sell to had beaten the crap out of him, and he needed me to come help him. This happened once before, so I knew it may happen again. I started walking to the park. It's maybe a 5-minute walk, so I didn't need my car. I saw his bike laying out on the grass at the entrance of the park, and my heart immediately sank. Just to paint a picture, the park is very small, and woods surround the entire area, except for a small dirt trail. There are houses not too far from the center of the park, but the trees are pretty dense, so you could barely see the houses at night. On either end of the trail, there are neighborhood streets, and there are street lamps on both sides of the trail. But the trail was maybe half of a mile long, and because of the dense woods, it was pitch black in there at night. I turned on my flashlight and started walking onto the trail and very quietly calling my boyfriend's name, gradually getting a little louder. After about 5 minutes of that, I heard a sound coming from further down the trail. Maybe it was just me wanting to hear him and imagining him being hurt, but it sounded almost like groaning, like he was trying to tell me where he was, but he couldn't actually speak. I walked fast towards the sound, and was trying to be reassuring, and telling him it's okay, and to keep making sounds so I could find him. I felt like I was getting closer, but then it sounded like the noise was drifting away from me and into the woods. I kept calling after him, and telling him to wait, and that I am here to help. I was too afraid to go deep into the woods, so I just stayed close to the trail and tried to look into the woods with my flashlight. The sound then seemed to move to the other side of the trail, and this time it was a little more clear and almost sounded like laughing. At this point, yeah, I'm scared, but I started getting annoyed because he used to prank me a lot, and I thought maybe he was just messing with me. I told him that this wasn't funny, and if he was messing with me, to just come out now. But I saw nothing. I just kept hearing the very short bursts of laughter every few seconds. I walked over to the other side, and a little off the trail, but not into the actual wooded area. There was an entrance to a French drain, the big drains that are almost like a tunnel, in this ditch right near the trail, and I hear the sound come from inside of the drain. I felt a little better, in a way, because we had just seen the new It, and he knew I loved it, and would reference or make jokes about it. He knew I was terrified of clowns, so he would never go so far as to dress up as Pennywise, but would joke about drains whenever we passed them or said he heard laughing. Part of me was just thinking that he was hiding in there on purpose to mess with me. I know it was stupid for me to think like that, and not immediately run away from laughing coming from a drain, but I was still kind of worried about my boyfriend, and my mind was clouded, so I convinced myself that it was him making these noises. Even if he was beaten bloody, I was not going to jump into a ditch and go into a French drain in the middle of the night. I love horror movies, but I don't like being in one. I tried to look as far into the drain as I could from the ledge, still being aware of my surroundings in the woods, because I knew I was not going in there unless I saw him. I decided to give up because it had been maybe 20 to 30 minutes since I got there. So I called out that I was giving up, and I'll be going home because at this point, it seemed like he was fine, just trying to scare me. I was walking towards one of the streets when my phone buzzed, and it was a Snapchat from my boyfriend. I rolled my eyes thinking he was sending me a picture of myself telling me, "I see you," or something dumb like that, because he always did that. But instead, it was a message from him apologizing for not getting a hold of me sooner, that his phone died, and he was finally able to message me. He said his friend had to come help him, and he was at the friend's house, along with a picture of him and his friend. I was suddenly covered in cold sweat. I was mortified, and I started running home because I had just told whoever was in that park that I was leaving, and I was so scared that they were going to come after me. When I got home, I locked all of the doors and just laid in bed, frozen with fear. My boyfriend came home a while after I got home, and I told him what happened, and he turned pale. He slowly started to tell me that just a couple of nights before, his friend was walking through the same trail, and he heard laughing too. He had turned on his flashlight, jumped into the ditch with the drain, and standing a ways into the drain I was trying to peer into was a man poorly dressed like a clown, holding a knife and laughing in short bursts. His friend ran away, and the clown chased him for a little bit, and eventually gave up and walked back to the park. I started crying. I was so stupid to have been there, but thank God I didn't go down closer to the drain, because I know if I saw a clown, I wouldn't be able to move, let alone run away. Since that day, I have not gone to that park, or even left my house alone at night. The Man Who Followed, from Nobody Amber, 777. It was July 2020 when this happened. I was staying over at my brother's house for a few weeks of the summer. We'll call him John for privacy. To give you an idea of the area, his house is on a large steep hill in the middle of Kentucky. It is surrounded by vast woodland, and his driveway is about 10 minutes long to walk. Now that you have an idea of the area, I'll tell the story. We were playing on his Xbox when we finally got bored around 7 p.m. We debated on what to do when he came up with the idea of going outside for a walk around. I dubiously agreed, and we got ready for the long, dark walk. Keep in mind that it was getting dark at 6 p.m. Thinking back on this, I have no idea why I thought this was a good idea. It was stupid to begin with. Once we're ready, we head out. While walking down his driveway, there were definitely a few creepy noises, but nothing too bad. Once we get onto the road, that's when it all begins. I got a bad feeling as soon as we walked past his driveway. About 5 minutes of talking about life, we hear a branch break in the woods to the right of us. Stopping dead in our tracks, we look over to see what made the noise. We weren't able to see whatever made the noise and shook it off. We began to walk faster when the noise of someone walking through the woods became apparent. At this point, we were already 15 to 20 minutes through the walk and agreed to turn back. On our way back, it got closer. We knew we were being followed. We picked up the pace, but kept up a normal conversation. "How is Mom doing?" he asked. "Oh, she's all right," I said. Normal stuff. About a minute from his driveway, we are stopped by the sound of a low chuckle. We start freaking out at the sound of this. We started running. The faster we got, the faster the thing in the woods got. I looked over with my flashlight to get a glimpse of whatever was following us. My blood ran cold. My flashlight illuminated a tall, bald man. He sees the flashlight and looks over, stopping. He smiled with his ugly yellow teeth. I ran faster than I ever had. I made a 10-minute run in 5. When we got to John's house, we shut and locked every window and door in his house. We looked out the window about 5 minutes after entering, and saw him in the nearby forest. His flashlight pointed up towards his face. My brother got his gun and shot out. He ran off into the darkness. His flashlight must have been bright enough to shine for at least a mile, because we watched it for a few minutes. That was the first encounter with the man, and hopefully the last. Playing games with ghosts. From Big Bad. I live in a quiet historical town on the Kansas-Missouri state line. It's far from the back roads, but smaller than most. The woods nearby are beautiful, especially in autumn. Looking back at what happened, it may make sense. We were in the very heart of the Bleeding Kansas conflict, pre-Civil War. John Brown, love him or hate him, scalped a lot of farmers. Tons of other grisly murder stories are tied to the area. The local college even has a ghost tour that runs through downtown. But that's what I'm about to tell you. What I've seen may be related to some obscure haunting, but beyond that, I have little clue what this man was doing. It was last week. My home is on the edge of the suburbs, so I'm seated right by a lovely creek and some woods. There's a paved trail alongside it, and I frequently take walks after dinner, or I used to. I'm usually alone, which is all the better. The white noise of the creek water gurgling and the very last of the day's bird calls always brightened my mood. I began my route later than usual, around 7:30 p.m. The sun had already been swallowed by the horizon of cottonwood trees, and the sky was dark violet. By then, the lampposts had activated, outlining the trail in their sticky orange light. I was shivering a little. I only had a t-shirt and flannel. It had been 75 Fahrenheit just yesterday. Now it was 20 below that. Guess that's just the Midwest experience. I got about 3 miles in, usually where I'd turn back home, when a noise caught my attention. I peered ahead of me to see another man walking down the path in my direction. He was counting out loud. 44, 45, 46, 47. I stood there, confused. As he stepped under one of the lights, I saw that he had a bandana tied across his face like a blindfold. He was dressed in a black hoodie and soft blue pants, and seemed to be the age of one of the college students from just out of town. I was too curious to just mind my own business and go home, so I waited right out of reach of one of the lamppost lights. More details were revealed as he stepped closer and counted ever higher. He was holding a sheet of paper in his left hand, like it was ripped from a notebook. He was smiling too, as he counted. By now he had reached 85. Was he on some sort of drug? I know there are some nasty hallucinogenics and deliriants, like DPH, that are unfortunately not unheard of spreading around here, mainly by the college. I'm not a small guy and he didn't seem to notice me. So I decided to lurk there, shivering, before asking if he was all right. I stepped into the light, and he must have perceived me through his bandana. He stopped counting and grinned. He lifted his blindfold, and then suddenly looked very disappointed. "Hey, kid, are you all right?" I asked. He then glared at me before yelling, "Damn it, you've ruined it! Why?" "Sorry, man. Ruined what?" I asked, before he then began panicking. He tossed his bandana away and looked behind him, uttering "no" repeatedly under his breath. "What were you even trying to do? Can I fix it?" I'm playing games with ghosts here, and you made me break the rules. And He then stared right at me, his eyes wide and grimacing in horror. Then, as his gaze seemed to focus on something behind me, he dropped to the ground like a sack of bricks. Shocked, I kneeled down to help him. I reached out my hand and almost felt him before I hesitated, looking behind me. I saw nothing but the black of the night, and the buzz of the lampposts and rhythm of the creek. Every hair on my body raised, and it felt downright freezing. I decided to run away, back home. I looked back at the young man on the ground. He still was not moving. I sprinted hysterically the whole way back to my house. Inside, I sat in front of the door the whole night before falling asleep. The next morning, I awoke on the hard tile of my foyer. After getting up in a daze, I remembered last night, and I remembered how I left that man to possibly die out on the trail. Did he die? I couldn't bring myself to venture onto the trail to see if he was still there until it was almost noon. Once I reached the 3-mile mark, however, he was gone. A few other people, including a damn family on a picnic, were on the trail and enjoying their day, unaware of last night completely. He had said he was playing games with ghosts. I had broken some rule, apparently, and that caused something. I looked online to see some paranormal games. These guides tell you how to summon some occult entity and provide an exhaustive list of rules you must follow and a condition to win the game with this spirit. One that freaked me out was one-man hide and seek, where you, and any other hiders if you aren't alone, fill a doll with your nail clippings and rice before stabbing it with scissors and saying, "Found you." Then you leave the scissors with the doll and go hide, and at dawn you must dump salt on the doll to end the game. I theorized that whoever that was might have been playing one of these ghost games, or thought they might have been, and had some panic attack when I encountered them and broke the rules. There had been no local news on anyone going missing or anything, and I don't know if that should comfort me or not. Either way, my favorite route to walk has been ruined. My skate park horror. From Anonymous. I have been a fan of skating ever since I was little. There is this skate park near my home that I often skate at. After my recent experience, I think I should just skate at home. The other day, I was at home watching TV when I decided to go skating. The sun was almost about to set when I left my house, but that didn't stop me. When I reached the skate park, I noticed it was empty, probably because it was a Wednesday. For me, it was a relief since I like skating alone. I put my roller skates on and started skating. After 15 or so minutes of skating, I noticed a black SUV pull up by the park. My eyes were locked on that SUV as I was skating. I couldn't see inside the vehicle because the sun had set, so the dark surrounded the vehicle. I had kept my eyes on the vehicle for quite some time, but I noticed no one had exited it. I shrugged it off, thinking that maybe the person was waiting for someone. A few moments later, when I had forgotten about the SUV, my eyes suddenly caught a glimpse of something. I saw 2 people exiting the SUV. They seemed to be coming my way. They looked tough, and they certainly weren't short, about 6 feet tall. I still couldn't see their faces, though, as the night surrounded them. I noticed one of them pull out a knife from their pockets. I decided to run, but my skates hindered me from doing so. In a quick action, I bent down and unfurled my skates. When I noticed the 2 men were now sprinting at me, I could now see their faces, and boy, were they a terrible sight. They looked so disfigured. Just as my skates came off, I made a run for it into the woods behind me. I ran the fastest I ever did. I swear I was tearing up from the adrenaline rush. The footsteps behind me grew quieter and quieter to the point they were gone. I hid behind a tree and spied from it. They were gone, or so I thought. A few minutes behind the tree, and I started to get impatient, so I sneaked to my car. I went around the skate park and to the parking lot. There I noticed the same black SUV parked in the same spot. They were still there. I crouched and continued to walk towards my car. I hoped to God that my car's unlock beep didn't alert the two, wherever they were. As I stood up to reach my door on the other side of the car, through the window, I saw them. They were glaring at me. I didn't even think of it, and got into my car, locked my doors, and started it up. The two freaks started banging on my window. I was on the verge of fainting from the horror. I started my car and backed up, realizing that I might have driven over one of their feet as I felt a slight bump and drove away. I safely reached home and saw that the bump I felt was actually a slit tire. Yes, the freak slit my tire as I was escaping. This has been my scariest encounter ever. I think it's better to just skate at home from now on. The mysterious sounds in the forest. From June Bird. I love camping. I've loved it for as long as I can remember, and throughout all of my camping experiences, I haven't experienced anything like this before. This happened early last year, and I was with my friend who we'll call Amy. We were camping together in a popular campground, and it was me, my mom, and my friend. Everything was normal until we were getting into our tent to go to sleep at a pretty late hour. I don't remember exactly, though. We were in the tent and had been talking for several hours, when all of a sudden, we heard a really loud, odd sound coming from an unknown source. The best way to describe the sound was a Zen bell blasted extremely loud and kind of a deep sound. It was a bit like a natural disaster alarm, in the way that it would repeat itself in increments. When it happened the first time, me and my friend both looked at each other in confusion, because neither of us knew what it was. We were kind of weirded out, but decided to continue the conversation. The sound went on for several hours after the first time, and probably continued after we were asleep. It was odd, because we didn't know why it would be playing, who was playing it, how it was played, or anything about it. It was just kind of weird to hear such a loud and man-made sound in the woods at such a late hour. Anyway, we still have no idea what it was to this day. What was that? From the Bat Bob. I am a guard on a base in Australia. Think huge woodland-type area with buildings here and there. I was on patrol one night at about 11 p.m. near a fork in the road I would travel. I was pulled to the side, having a snack, when I felt something watching me from ahead. Now I am used to animals being all around me here, kangaroos, foxes, etc. But this thing was staring, not running away, as I was used to seeing. Now I flicked on my car's floodlights. This thing was still staring at me, and it looked like a bigger than normal fox. We sat staring across from each other for a few minutes, when I figured I am going to see what the hell this is. It started to walk across the road, and it moved like it had seen how a fox would move, but wasn't sure how to do it. Its body was longer than a normal fox and grayer. I was moving closer in the car, the floodlights still catching its eyes that were on me the whole time, until it had crossed the road, and I pulled level to the driver's side. The whole time, this thing stared at me. Then, without warning, it stood up on its feet, and I heard a high-pitched laughter that felt like it was at me. I got out of there and tried not to think about it. But on my way back, I thought I need to know what is going on. I know. Mistake. I pulled over to the side of the road, pulled out my trusty flashlight, and turned it on. I walked towards the area, sweeping the ground in front of it. It was flat. No holes or anything that a creature could pop down and away. Just then, my light flickered, and off it went. I heard the same laugh. I ran and left that area like a bat out of hell, and for the next month when I worked there, I always felt like I was being watched. I was moved to a different role on the base, standing guard at a gatehouse. I still felt watched. When one morning I walked towards the gatehouse, I heard the laugh and saw a tail disappear under the gatehouse. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. A rabbit or something else? From Lilia Radk. I'm not sure if this is just me being paranoid from listening to your podcast or what I saw. This happened in my hometown, Kotka, in Finland. I had been at my friend's place after school until 11 p.m., and now I was walking home in the dark. In my neighborhood, there are many patches of forest all around the place. I think there's less housing than there is forest. I was about 1 kilometer away from home. There was forest on both sides of the road. There's a bigger road behind one of the forest patches. I could already see the local store, but the eerie feeling of being surrounded by dark forest still hung around. I had kept my eyes on the ground to not look at the forest. I looked up as I was coming to a crosswalk. There's a truck stop on the opposite side of the road. At the truck stop, there it was sitting, a rabbit-like creature. I wasn't bothered by it, as there's a lot of wildlife in the area. I kept walking as the creature kept sitting there. Now that I was closer, about 15 meters away, I could see that it was way too big to be a rabbit. It was about the same size as a public trash can. It was white, with light brown spots. My old dog died when I was 6. That thing was the same size and color as the dog. It stood up when I stopped. It started walking along the road, getting closer and closer to the forest. I kept walking, not taking my eyes off of it. The dog kept making sure that I was walking. It felt so familiar. It felt like he wanted me to follow. I had to fight the urge to follow it. As it got to the edge of the forest, we both stopped. We stared at each other from opposite sides of the road. As it realized that I wasn't following, it took one last step and disappeared into thin air. I'm a fast walker, but the walk home took forever. I was terrified. I only felt safe when I closed the door behind me. The familiar feeling never went away. I've seen the same dog before, but this was the first time he's asked me to follow him. I've seen other pets or family members that have passed away. They never need me for anything. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at Dark Prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.